Okay, we say welcome to our podcast, Counselor Connections. It's Real Talk with Stanley and
Tinger.
and today we want to provide you with real, relevant, and reliable strategies for responsible Christian living for today. Today we want to talk a little bit about the National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, which is July, and it's going to be centered around mental health for minorities. And we're going to predominantly focus on our African American community today.
And this is a little different from the information we have given you of the last several months on general mental health. Today, our focus, we want to make sure that everybody has a good understanding of why this month was put in place. It is in observance of how we can help improve the mental health treatment and services for our multicultural community through having increased awareness. We usually don't know all that is out there for us, so we're trying to provide more awareness. That is where this National Minority Mental Health Awareness came from. We all may experience challenges with our mental illness regardless of our background, but we know that it seems to be more difficult to get services depending on our background or our culture. So we can see that African Americans make up 13.4% of the U.S. population. And of that number, there's over 16% that have reported having a mental illness. That is 7 million people that in our African American community that have reported having a mental illness.
And just to kind of put it all in perspective, if you can see the graph, it's like taking three large cities. A lot of times, we hear the numbers and we say, oh, that's a huge number. But to put it all in perspective, it's like if you take a large city, Chicago, and that's huge. Then you take a large city like Houston, and that is very huge. And let's add on to that another large city, Philadelphia. And you combine them, not individually, but you combine those three large cities. So that's the kind of qualify and quantify that number for you of 7 million people, how huge that number is and why it is alarming, the information that she's sharing with you and that we're going to share with you today. Now, she talked a bit about those statistics and giving you some data. So now we want to talk about a little bit about the mental health disparities. And that's just for our African American community. And if you can follow the graph, it says minorities are less likely to receive diagnosis and treatment for their mental illness, have less access to mental health services, and often receive a poorer quality of mental health care. So, want to elaborate a little bit on that. They're less likely to receive diagnosis and treatment for their mental illness. A lot of times when they go in, because sometimes we see symptoms of the greater issue, they're not receiving a diagnosis for what's really going on. And sometimes it's just perceived as something superficial when we have learned that there are deeper issues underlying. And Tinger, you had something you wanted to share on that?
A lot of times, because of the practitioners not really understanding the culture and the background of our minority population, there are lots of misdiagnoses. And that's huge in feeling better, because you're being treated for something that is not an issue. You're given medication that is not appropriate.
Okay. Let's add to that. In 2019, suicide was the second leading cause of death for blacks or African Americans ages 15 to 24. Now, we said the second leading cause, and we're talking about a population of ages 15 to 24. So that's our youth. That they're very young, and suicide is so final. The finality of it all is you can't go back and change it. So this is why it's so alarming. The second leading cause, which is huge, just for our African American population of our youth. And a lot of times they have issues that they're dealing with, and a lot of times they also feel like I just don't have another way out. And that's because culturally, a lot of times we just don't talk about it. So we want to bring that into perspective so we can highlight what's going on in our young population, because if we don't talk about it, then they won't know that there's help. They won't know that there are resources to help them get beyond the now. And this is why we want to really highlight what's really going on in our communities, because when we don't talk about it, it's buried. And then after it's buried, people don't feel like I really have somewhere else that I can go to help myself feel better than I am right now. So that statistic is very alarming, and I stress that because that's our youth. And if that's a part of our youth, our generation, then what's going to be left? If they don't feel like I have help out there that's available just for me, they're going to continue to keep it bottled up and feel like there is no help and my only answer is suicide. And so we need to combat that.
And to add to that, we have both spent several years working with this age group and population. And not only do we see just pressures from family life, but that pressure to succeed in academics or to exceed in sports. And they feel that they're always in that state of having to perform. Have you seen more of that, with the high school students and trying to get into college and
as time has gone by, it has become more prevalent because of the pressures. Not saying that we never had pressures in our generation, but with the younger generation, a lot of the pressures to do well and to succeed in school, and as she said, to excel, a lot of those pressures are internalized. And when they're internalized, they feel as if I have to do these things in order to compete. I have to do this to make sure that I'm pleasing my teachers or I'm pleasing my parents. And those pressures sometimes just become insurmountable to some of them by themselves. So yes, we want to highlight that there are triggers, there are things that often lead to that. And with that being said, I want to stress that there's something we call signs of suicide. And those signs of suicide, those are indicators that something's not quite right. You know your child, you know what's going on, or even if you're a teenager and you recognize something isn't just quite normal like me. There are resources, but once you observe those signs and see that this is going on, then that's the first key to say, I need to seek help. And as she said, having worked in a high school, I had students who would come to me and they would just start off with the general conversation or with a teacher, and the teacher would send them to me. And then we began to talk, and you would realize that there were some serious signs going on, which sometimes resulted in us as counselors in that setting having to call and schedule for them to get an immediate assessment so that we would make sure that they were fine. If not, then they would get the help that they need. But that population, those pressures that we see sometimes in life, we just take it for granted. A lot of them internalize those pressures, and they feel like that unfortunate finality of suicide is their only answer. So we want to combat that.
Just that feeling of hopelessness.
Yes.
Not feeling like there is a way to conquer this. So we want to make sure that if you see any of those signs, recognize that with this age group, if something starts to go left, as in not wanting to hang out with friends anymore, which is their most prized possession, is to be able to hang out with friends. When they start to just want to stay in their rooms or not be a part of family activities.
Withdrawn.
Just withdrawn, giving away things. Those are some prominent signs that indicates that there's something wrong, that we need to seek some type of assistance.
Right, and we believe in prayer, obviously. We're a part of Christian living. But in addition to prayer, when you begin to see these signs, it's not okay to just say, we're going to pray for you, or you're going to be okay. You're going to be all right. You're going to be all right. Because there often are underlying issues and they need to be heard. So as we're talking to you and sharing this, we're saying when you see these things happening, they're red flags. Get them some help. Get them some help. And if they're resistant and say, I'm okay, I'm fine, I'm just fine, depression is very real. And it's okay to get them. And there are lots of mental health facilities that provide free assessments for that population. Or even if you're an adult and you're having some of these symptoms, they will provide you with a free assessment and to help to determine your level of depression, to see if you're okay to return home, or sometimes if you need to talk to someone. But when you see these signs, then we're strongly urging you to get help, seek out help. And the next one we want to talk about is how the death rate for suicide for blacks or African American men was 4 times greater than for African American women in 2018. Now, talking about how that's greater, yes, both populations are African American, but it was 4 times greater. We're not talking homicide, we said suicide. We're talking mental health here. So this is where someone takes his or her own life, and as I said, make that final move in taking their lives. But it's 4 times greater than for the women in the African American population, which is huge, huge. And Tindra, you were saying earlier a reason why you feel not why you feel that, why we know that's the case.
Men usually use a more aggressive type of lethal, a lethal. It's more lethal, like a gunshot, or, if they're going to stab themselves, they're going to do it at a level that they know there's no turning back. Women tend to oftentimes attempt suicide more often, but their weapons aren't as lethal. Women might try to slit their wrists, which that's, not as quick as a gunshot wound. So men tend to be more aggressive in what type of weapon that they use.
And access, and this is important, and we say this today because access is so important. And a lot of times, that's the first thing one would ask in a mental health facility. Do you have access? Because if there are guns in the home, if there are knives accessible to you, whether you're a teenager or an adult, these things, as she said, they're a part of the attempt. But some of the attempts, and if your level of depression is so great, some of the attempts become final. And this is what's so concerning, because males tend to, as she said, choose means of committing suicide that are definitely final. They're not trying to get attention. It's usually they just want to end the pain. But if you see these things, we're saying respond, even if it's to get them help. And you say, well, that's not me. But if you see these things going on, once again, those are red flags, and getting that loved one or someone you care about, getting them some help. Now, the next, the black females, grades 9 through 12 were 60% more likely to attempt suicide in 2019 as compared to non-Hispanic white females of the same age. Now, Tindra touched upon this just a few minutes ago, and how they tend to females attempt suicide more, but males tend to die more often than the females. So all of it really is, at the end of the day, keep this in mind, everybody wants to feel better when they're going through some pain. And when you talk about going through pain and you add on the level of depression, sometimes it can, that's why it's called depression, it holds them down, it makes you feel low. But it can be so overwhelming, and it often feels insurmountable that you feel like there is no other solution. But then you say, okay, I really, as I've talked to every person that I've ever talked to regarding suicide, they want to feel better. They just want the pain to stop. And we're saying there are ways for the pain to stop without the finality of suicide. So this is why we're reaching out, especially to the African American community, which is very guarded, oftentimes close knit, but we've used this word in the past, but because of a stigma, and you'll hear a little bit more about it in a little bit, but we want to reverse that so they will understand that I don't even have, if I want to feel better, I don't have to attempt suicide. I can go talk to someone. I can find help that's going to help me get through my right now. So this is why we wanted to mention that even though they attempt it more, males typically die more from suicide than do females. Poverty levels affect mental health status. Poverty levels, this is important. Black or African Americans living below the poverty level as compared to those over twice the poverty level are twice as likely to report serious psychological distress. Poverty, one's income makes a huge difference because one's income determines oftentimes the access to resources that you can obtain. So if you're impoverished, as many who may be hearing this can relate to, or if you grew up especially in rural North Carolina, and even as an adult, you can look back and say, well, we didn't have this and we didn't have that. A lot of things were done at the home from within the family. And be it whether you needed food or money or whatever the resource needed was, you did it within the family. But then we say there are times when you're not equipped when it comes to mental health issues to handle some of the deeper issues that an individual may have. So this is why we're saying to you that even though a person may be impoverished and they may struggle from getting access because of that poverty level, we say nowadays there are so many resources. Opposed to when I was a child, there are so many resources available to you and anyone who may be in an impoverished situation, so that they will know their limited environment does not determine their outcome. So we want to just really stress that even though it factors into their psychological distress, because I don't have this or I don't have that, I don't have access to this, we see how it plays into the quality of life for people, which also factors into one's psychological mental health. So we just say to you, don't allow that to be a factor to deter you from getting help, because all you have to do, no matter where you live, especially in the state of North Carolina, with, for that matter, any state, is if you call your health department, you say that's not mental health. If you call the health department, mental health is a component of it, and they can help guide you to free resources. They can also provide you with, if you need transportation to and from, even if you fall below a certain income. But we know there are resources out there for you. Even though you may say, I just don't have the financial resources, there are free resources that will help you, even if you don't have that extra income to pay for a therapist or a counselor. And we want to share this last one with you. A report from the U.S. Surgeon General, it found that from 1980 to 1995, the suicide rate among African Americans ages 10 to 14 increased 233% as compared to 120% of non-Hispanic whites. 233, it increased over that period of 80 through 95. how it just blossomed and it,
Doubled.
it just really increased. And she said it's double that of their counterparts who are non-Hispanic or whites. And that's alarming. One would say they're all kids, and what is going on 10 to 14? That's that middle school age.
From about 4th or 5th grade up through 8th grade.
It's really alarming. And you say, okay, I have kids. And like I said, often I remember for me, thank God for grace and mercy. But, people would just say, okay, go out and play, or, don't just keep lying around, get up from there. And those things are more easily said than done if you're that person and you're suffering from depression. So I'm not saying don't encourage your child to get up or to be active, but I am saying listen, because this is why the number skyrocketed so much, as Tinger talked about a few moments ago. Expectations for children are somewhat the same today, but they are different today than they were before. And a lot of times kids feel that in order to handle the stress, the pressure, you talk about social media and all those things that they have available to them now that we didn't have, that factor into their mental health. And they don't always say it, they don't always show it. But we're saying, even if you're saying, I'm not equipped to help them, you don't have to be. There is help out there for you. We want you to tap into those resources so that we say that this number, extremely high percentage, will decrease, not increase, because there are resources for children as well.
And we know that the social media has such influence over our children, whether what they're seeing on TV or on the internet, whether it's true or not. At that age, they don't always understand that this is not real life. So they try to portray some of those images.
Right.
And when it's not working for them, that sends them either farther down the wrong path.
And we hope you're listening, because a lot of our statistics really focus on that younger population and what they're going through and the brokenness that they feel. But if we don't know how to work with that, or even in the simplest form, how to see it and acknowledge it, then the statistics continue, or in some cases they increase. So this is why we want to highlight these disparities, because it doesn't matter what the ethnicity is. A lost child to mental health crisis, via suicide, is hurtful and alarming. Doesn't matter what the ethnicity is. But we're just really stressing, because July is that month to highlight that mental health for African Americans. It is higher. And one of the reasons it's higher is because we tend to not talk about it. We tend to not really see the signals and take them to heart that help is needed. And a lot of times we don't see it, unfortunately, until it's too late. So we want to combat that. Thank you for watching Counselors Connection, Real Talk. Tune in next time for part 2 of today's episode.
A mystery. Let's share a mystery. Together we can find the answer. Together